We live in interesting times for the headlines. A damning new UN report published on Sunday said the world is falling badly behind in the race to avert climate disaster because of runaway warming, with the 5-year period ending 2019 set to be the hottest ever. British travel firm Thomas Cook collapsed into bankruptcy, leaving some 600,000 holidaymakers stranded and sparking the UK's biggest repatriation since World War II. Hong Kong riot police fired tear gas at pro-democracy protesters outside a mall in the northern town of Sha Tin.
Game of Thrones.
And Game of Thrones took the top Emmy for Best Drama. I'm Alma Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us, and now to the news. A damning new UN report published on Sunday said the world is falling badly behind in the race to avert climate disaster because of runaway warming, with the 5-year period ending 2019 set to be the hottest ever. Now, this comes ahead of a major UN climate summit Monday that will be attended by more than 60 world leaders, as Secretary General Antonio Guterres pushed for countries to increase their greenhouse gas reduction targets. The report highlighted the urgent need for the development of concrete actions that halt global warming and the worst effects of climate change. According to its authors, the Science Advisory Group to the summit, average global temperature between 2015 to 2019 is on track to be the hottest of any 5-year period on record, according to the report compiled by the World Meteorological Organization. The period is currently estimated to be 1.1 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial from 1850 to 1900 times and 0.2 degrees Celsius warmer than 2011 to 2015, according to the report. The past 4 years were already the hottest since record-keeping began in 1850.
The temperature over that period is now 1.1 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial estimated reference period 1850 to 1900. Comparing to the previous 5-year period, which is the purpose of this report, we can see that is 0.2 degrees centigrade warmer than 2011-2015.
The impacts of climate change are occurring faster and to a greater degree than what you would think if you read the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports. And that's probably because the IPCC reports are a consensus of hundreds of scientists' views. So in a way, it's a kind of a lowest common denominator set of points of agreement about the state of the science. The current nationally determined contributions submitted by the parties to the Paris Agreement would have to be 3 times as ambitious as they currently are to meet the 2-degree target, and 5 times as ambitious as they currently are to meet the 1.5-degree target. And that assumes, of course, that these pledges are actually implemented.
We are at risk of crossing several critical tipping points, according to Lina Srivastava, the outgoing Vice Chancellor of the Terry School of Advanced Studies in India, during a press conference at the United Nations, before adding that climate impacts are hitting harder and sooner. The press conference follows the release of the new damning report, which says the world is falling badly behind in the race to avert climate disaster. Take a look.
And we have been breaking records in temperatures. Last July was the warmest single month since 1850, and last June was the warmest June that we have observed since 1850 again. And so far we have seen 1.1 degree warming.
We are at risk of crossing several critical tipping points in the planetary systems. And I think there's also in the science community a greater recognition of the fact that climate impacts are hitting harder and sooner than what climate assessments had estimated almost a decade ago.
The situation is quite clear. I mean, the energy sector, especially the power sector, needs to decarbonize. You need to look at transport. You need to look at land-based solutions in agriculture and forestry. And all of it is basically known. There's not a need to wait for new inventions or anything like that. It's more a question about what it takes to get the political will to move ahead.
One take-home message is that the global emissions of carbon dioxide for 2018 appear to have gone up about 2.1%. So it's the largest increase we've seen in more than 5 years. And 2019 is on track to rise further as the global economy grows. So there's something arbitrary to me about 1.5 and 2. Every tenth of a degree matters, as Thelma has just said. So, yes, we've probably missed the boat for 1.5. We could come back to it with negative emissions, but there's nothing arbitrary about it.
The United Nations held its first ever Youth Climate Summit with the participation of some 1,000 young people from over 100 countries. The UN Youth Climate Summit is a platform for the young leaders who are driving climate action to showcase their solutions at the United Nations and to meaningfully engage with decision makers on the defining issue of our time. Speaking at the opening ceremony was Swedish climate activist and Nobel Peace Prize nominee Greta Thunberg. Take a look.
Yesterday, millions of people across the globe marched and demanded real climate action, especially young people. We showed that we are united and that we, young people, are unstoppable.
We can make this happen by...
Meanwhile, Argentinian activist Bruno Rodriguez said the climate and ecological crisis the world is facing today represents the political, economic, and cultural crisis of our time. He also stressed that the scientific community is clear in that the world is facing an existential emergency, and he also stressed that world leaders have an obligation to make radical change.
I come from a Latin American country. The story of our region is the story of 5 centuries of pillage. For us, the concepts of climate and environmental justice are a matter of human rights, social justice, and national sovereignty in relation to our natural resources. That is why we need to demand that the 100 companies responsible of 71% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions transition towards a sustainable path. We can make this happen by standing together and saying enough is enough. We don't want fossil fuels anymore.
Rodriguez also stressed that young climate activists around the world are building a new collective consciousness and would not wait passively to lead on dealing with the problems that current leaders have created. He called on the Secretary General to stop demanding that world leaders listen to science, rather to demand that they act on science. Meanwhile, Kenyan climate activist Wanjuhi Noroji said her farming community relied on the rivers that flow from Mount Kenya and had never experienced water or food shortages before January of 2018. She said the youth in her community to social media to save their forests, which in turn led to reforms at the national level.
For those of us in Africa, adaptation and resilience has become our focus in our effort to survive the climate crisis. We are the lowest emitters but suffer the most. But this is not the time to shift blame. This is the time to work together. We, the over 625 million youth in Africa, therefore ask for support, especially technical, financial, and skills transfer of the youth in their action and innovations towards climate change mitigation and adaptation.
being proven wrong.
For her part, Fijian climate activist Komal Karishma Kumar said young people in different parts of the world are living in constant fear. She also said despite negotiations on climate policy starting in 1992, emissions continue to rise.
For many here, this may be about 36 or 70 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year. But where I come from, it is about our very way of life, what lives and what dies. With due respect, between the graded IPCC graphs and multiple scenarios, things are black and white for us. Loss and damage compensation and additional support for low-income countries are still not comprehensive. And let it be clear, we are not insurance policies, we are human beings.
The young Fijian activists called upon everyone, especially duty bearers and policymakers, to respect the rights of future generations. UN Chief Antonio Gutierrez, who was participating in the summit, as keynote listener, said one of the problems with world leaders is that they talk too much and listen too little. He also said he was very enthusiastic about the global youth movement for climate action, adding that young people have started a dynamic impulse around the world, moving with them their families and communities, which has started to have an impact on business and government policies. Gutierrez also said the world was still losing the race against climate change, but noted that the momentum was shifting largely due to the efforts of the youth movement, starting with Greta Thunberg's initiative.
Towards a sustainable path.
My generation has largely failed until now to preserve both justice in the world and to preserve the planet. I have granddaughters. I want my granddaughters to live in a livable planet. My generation has a huge responsibility. It is your generation that must make us be accountable to make sure that we don't betray the future of humankind. The ice caps disappearing.
Meanwhile, Typhoon Taro approached southwestern Japan with heavy rains and strong winds, grounding hundreds of regional flights. Take a look. Tapa, with gusts of up to 162 kilometers per hour, was expected to draw near Nagasaki Prefecture overnight, according to the Japan Meteorological Agency. It was on course to travel through the channel between Japan and the Korean Peninsula before moving toward northern Japan on Monday, when it's expected to weaken and be downgraded. The storm prompted cancellations of more than 400 domestic flights, according to national broadcaster NHK. Serious caution is warranted for violent winds, high waves, and landslides, according to Japan's Fire and Disaster Management Agency in a statement. So far, the typhoon has caused 21 minor injuries, mostly in the southern island region of Okinawa that was hit by the storm earlier. Evacuation advisories have been issued to more than 2,000 regional residents, according to the Disaster Management Agency. Dozens of people dressed in black went on a funeral march up a steep Swiss mountainside to mark the disappearance of an alpine glacier amid growing global alarm over climate change.
When I started doing mass balance measurements on this glacier 14 years ago, the glacier was already small, but it was intact. Then it has strongly melted, so we have lost massive amounts of ice over the years, but it remained like one glacier, one ice mass. And in 2018, with this very strong summer heat waves, it suddenly split into two and it started falling in pieces. So personally, of course, I'm very sad. I've built up a relation to this glacier over the years. I've been there many, many times and seen how it is changing. As a scientist, I'm also interested in monitoring this extinction of this glacier, of course, but personally, I'm very sad.
Haas and other scientists recently cautioned more than 90% of the alpine glaciers could disappear by the end of this century if greenhouse gas emissions are not reined in. Regardless of what actions humans take now, the Alps will lose at least half of their ice mass by 2100, according to their study published in April. Thousands of activists fanned out across beaches and rivers throughout Asia on Saturday, picking up rubbish and drawing attention to the amount of trash that is dumped worldwide a day after millions march to urge world leaders to act on climate change. The volunteers turned out for World Cleanup Day, an initiative that has got millions into the streets and cleaning up litter across the globe since it began just over a decade ago. In the Philippines, some 10,000 people swept across a long stretch of beach on heavily polluted Manila Bay, clutching sacks they filled with rubbish. Plastic pollution is a major problem across Southeast Asia, but particularly in the Philippines, which, along with China, Vietnam, and Indonesia, is frequently listed among the world's worst offenders.
Of course, it makes me awful to be here seeing this all garbage. But you know, this is the result of Filipinos all living here, diba? So at least we're here now to correct all the mistakes from the past people living here.
The mass cleanup is coordinated by the Let's Do It Foundation, which aims to connect and empower people and organizations around the world to make our planet waste-free, according to its website. 79% of the plastic ever made has ended up dumped with little reused or destroyed, despite recycling and other initiatives to curb use, according to a UN report from 2018. Just 9% of the 9 billion tons of plastic the world has produced has been recycled. Eagle News will be right back.
Mga kamag-anak, kaibigan at kababayan po namin sa Middle East and North Africa, masayang balita ang hatid po namin sa inyo. Ang Net25 ay makakasama nyo na sa inyong mga tahanan. Mapapanood nyo na ang inyong mga paboritong programa sa pamamagitan ng OSN, ang pinakamalaking entertainment network sa buong rehiyon. Sa Channel 725, maihahatid na namin sa inyo ang mga pangunahing balita at mahahalagang impormasyon. Kaya makisaya, makisalo tuwing umaga at panoorin ang mga programa ng mga hinahangaang celebrities and OPM artists, same day as the Philippines. You can also watch Net25 live and on demand anytime, anywhere on any mobile device on OSN Play. Kaya tawag na sa OSN to learn more on how to get Net25. Sa Net25 on OSN, siguradong at home ka dito.
Foreign Affairs Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr. said the Philippines can manage without the loans from states that voted in favor of an Iceland-led resolution which sought a review of the human rights situation in the country. Good idea. We don't need the money. We've more than enough without turning to anyone outside, except Japan, of course, whose generosity is unconditional, quick, and whose motivation is honestly to help the Philippines. The rest are tongue-in-cheek and negligible. An Inquirer article dated September 20 reported that the Office of the President issued a confidential memorandum suspending the negotiations or signing of all loans and grants from the 18 nations that backed the United Nations Human Rights Council resolution. France and Sweden were among the non-members that co-sponsored the resolution last July, while the 18 UNHCR member states that voted yes were Argentina, Australia, Austria, Bahamas, Bulgaria, Croatia, Czech Republic, Denmark, Fiji, Iceland, Italy, Mexico, Peru, Slovakia, Spain, Ukraine, the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland and Uruguay. Meanwhile, on Monday, presidential spokesman and legal advisor Salvador Panelo clarified that the memorandum on the loan suspension was indeed issued by Medialdea upon the order of the president. He added that the president could not comprehend why Iceland was more concerned about the alleged drug-related deaths but allows the killing of unborn babies. Iceland recently spearheaded the resolution, seeking an inquiry into the drug-related killings in the Philippines.
He explained to me why he feels that the Iceland resolution is not only offensive but is also to him, but also offensive to this country, because that Iceland resolution presupposes that we're not doing anything about the complaints about abuses, which is not true. We've been prosecuting. In fact, every death arising from police operation on drugs is automatically subject to administrative and criminal prosecution, because the SOP there is when there is death arising from any raid involving the police, immediately they are subjected to administrative and criminal prosecution. But ang problema kasi, marami nagrereklamo, may mga nagrereklamo ng police abuse, pero hindi sila nagpa-file formally. Kung mag-file naman, wala namang ebidensya. Pero pag meron, inihahain. He cannot comprehend why Iceland is so concerned about the alleged brutal slaying of suspected criminals, which occur because the lives of those people who are enforcing the law are endangered, and yet it has a law that allows killing, murdering unborn children, unborn babies, aged 6 months and below. Kaya, that's why he said, hindi po pwede ito. They're imposing their culture to us, pero tingnan mo ginagawa nila.
All right, let's go back to environment news. In New Zealand, Iglesia ni Cristo, the Philippine Embassy, Hut City Council, and the Hut City Council joined together in a coastal cleanup during the World Cleanup Day. Greg Besa reports from the scene.
An estimated of more than 30 million volunteers from 150 countries who are working together to address the global waste problem, including the problem of marine debris. On this day, designated as World Cleanup Day, people from all walks of life in varying time zones and climate temperatures are united regardless of their territorial locations and racial backgrounds to reduce tons of waste and garbage around the globe. In the Wellington region, New Zealand, the Philippine Embassy, in partnership with the Hut City Council, is leading the initiative in spearheading a coastal cleanup, which is enthusiastically participated in by the members of the Iglesia ni Cristo Church of Christ. At 10 o'clock in the morning of a sunny day, the Philippine Embassy staff and their families and the members of the Iglesia ni Cristo Church of Christ gathered together at Pitoni Esplanade Lower Hut as they were eagerly preparing themselves for the cleanup. Prior to the start of the activity, a brief ceremony was held wherein the Philippine Ambassador to New Zealand, Jesus Domingo, conveyed his gratitude to all of those who were in attendance, among others. During this occasion, the Philippine Ambassador handed in certificates of recognition to the Iglesia ni Cristo Church of Christ congregations in Wellington and Waikanae, whose members were taking part in the coastal cleanup. On the other hand, Alan Pope, the Hut City Council Environmental Officer, gave a brief orientation on the do's and don'ts while doing the cleanup, especially on how to deal with sharp and seemingly infectious objects and waste. Right after the ceremony, participants went straight to their assigned areas to start picking up any garbage that they could find along the way. Members of the Iglesia ni Cristo from the adult to the young people, eagerly and happily did their part in the cleanup as they collected as much garbage as they could. The Philippine ambassador could not hide his delight of the good turnout of participants, as he noted that the cleanup was also in conjunction with the World Cleanup Day and somehow inspired by those campaigning against climate change. Representatives of Hat City Council also conveyed their gladness and excitement of the well-attended coastal cleanup.
We are on World Cleanup Day.
As usual, and there's an amazing turnout today, which is absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, it must be about 150 people going down the beach right this minute.
Well, I hope they'll find something very interesting and bring it back.
Hopefully, yes. Yeah, but it's a glorious day today. Blue sky, sunshine, hardly any wind. Just what we want.
We've ordered a perfect day for this.
Our volunteers from the community have been spearheaded by the Iglesia ni Cristo, or Church of Christ locales of Wellington and Waikanai. So here we spread out all throughout Lower Hutt. The embassy and friends are taking care of this part, the Petoni Esplanade. So thank you again for tuning in, and hopefully you'll join us in other cleanup drive. So although today we're joining World Cleanup Day, we're also inspired by those who are campaigning against climate change and also commemorating the UN Day of Peace today. So maraming salamat po, namihi, and let's pick up and keep Lower Hutt and New Zealand and this planet beautiful.
On the part of the members of the church, they were thankful to the church administration for allowing them to be part of such kind of community undertaking.
First of all, we'd like to thank our Lord God and our Lord Jesus Christ and the church administration because they approved po na ang mga kapatid, mga may tungkulin sa Wellington Region, district po ng New Zealand ay makipagkaisa dito sa aktibidad ng World Cleanup Day. Kami po ay masayang-masaya sa pakikipagkaisa sa ganitong mga aktibidad.
We feel very fortunate and blessed to have been part of this very important event, this worldwide cleanup, and being able to show the world and the community that we are strong community partners in times of need, and that is to clean up the coastal.
Today we're out on Petoni Beach in Wellington, New Zealand, doing a worldwide cleanup under the guidance of the church administration. Today's goal is to help beautify this beautiful planet that we live on and to help the longevity of the species that cohabit with us.
Today we are conducting a cleanup drive here in Wellington, and this is spearheaded by the Philippine Embassy and it was joined by Church of Christ members from the local of Wellington and Waikanai, and everyone is participating in this important event so that we can be a part of this community service that really very important for the...
The coastal cleanup is another collaboration between the Philippine Embassy and the Hat City Council, aimed at not only in keeping the city clean and beautiful, but also to strengthen further the relationship between the two. But for the members of the Iglesia ni Cristo Church of Christ, through the dynamic leadership of Brother Eduardo V. Manalo, the coastal cleanup is another means, a humble way of doing good again to the community, especially in loving and caring the environment. From Petoni Esplanade, Wellington Region, New Zealand, this is Greg Bessa. I am and will always be one with 25.
Thank you, Greg. In other news, pro-democracy protesters clashed with riot police outside a mall on Sunday, with some activists vandalizing a nearby subway station and defacing a Chinese flag. But plans to disrupt the airport did not materialize. Police fired brief volleys of tear gas and rubber bullets in the northern town of Shatin late Sunday afternoon, capping a day which saw thousands rally peacefully inside a mall before the mood soured. Authorities reduced rail and bus links to the city's airport, while police stepped up security checks in a successful bid to stop a crowd from massing at the bustling transport hub. The airport, the world's 8th busiest, has become a frequent target for demonstrators pushing for greater democratic rights and police accountability. Online forums used by the largely leaderless movement had called for a stress test of the airport on Sunday, code for disrupting travel links or occupying buildings. Instead, thousands gathered inside a mall in the northern town of Shatin to sing protest songs and make origami cranes, the latest rally in what has now been 16 consecutive weekends of protests and clashes. Many shops inside the complex shuttered, but the unsanctioned rally remained civil for much of the afternoon. Meanwhile, prominent Hong Kong pro-democracy activists tell AFP in an exclusive interview that the city has turned into a police state as the protesters continue to take to the streets. Take a look.
The police has systematically concealed their identity, not showing their faces, and which make accountability impossible. There is no way within the system to know who and when and what they do, and that is very worrying because our police system have been corrupted into a personal tool for Carrie Lam to maintain her power and to abuse, the public, power to torture the people, to silence the people, right?
So we do think that Hong Kong has become a police state where the government is hiding behind the police force and refusing to find solutions to the present crisis in Hong Kong right now.
And the oldest arrested person at the age of 63 and the youngest one at the age of 12. Who can imagine a primary school kid at the age of 12 will be arrested by Hong Kong police? But that's why we describe Hong Kong transformed it from a modern global city to a police state with police violence. Even I've been arrested, jailed for 120 days. The price I pay is really small, especially more than 200 Hong Kongers. We're already facing the prosecution and in the worst scenario, maybe the riot charges to jail them for 10 years. So I think now I'm not the one really sacrifice a lot. And
To Indonesia now, at least one person was killed as Indonesia's Papua region plunged into fresh unrest on Monday, according to the military, as protesters burned down a government office and other buildings in Wamena City. Papua, on the western half of New Guinea Island, has been gripped by weeks of violent protests, fueled by anger over racism, as well as fresh calls for self-rule in the impoverished territory. The clashes had died down in recent days but flared up again as hundreds took to the streets and houses and stores went up in flames. Another demonstration erupted in the provincial capital, Jayapura, where security forces fired warning shots above stone-throwing protesters at a university, according to an AFP reporter on the scene. A soldier was stabbed to death near Jayapura, the military said, while activists said at least one Papuan University student was shot dead and another wounded in the same area. Monday's protests in Wamena, mostly involving high schoolers, were reportedly sparked by racist comments made by a teacher, but police have disputed that account, calling it a hoax. Resource-rich Papua, which is home to Grasberg, the world's biggest gold mine and second biggest copper mine, was a Dutch colony that was incorporated into Indonesia after a controversial UN-backed referendum in 1969. Since then, the region has endured decades of mostly low-level separatist conflict. Staying in Indonesia, authorities have cited failures in the Boeing 737 MAX design and oversight as contributing to the 2018 Lion Air plane crash, according to the Wall Street Journal. The report into the crash, which will be formally released in early November, also blames pilot error and maintenance issues for the crash that killed 189 people shortly after the flight departed from Jakarta last October. The Boeing plane model was later grounded worldwide after an Ethiopian Airlines 737 MAX crashed after taking off from Addis Ababa in March, killing 157 people. Preliminary investigations into both accidents have implicated the MCA's or MCA's anti-stall system designed specifically for the 737 MAX. Indonesian investigators could still change their findings, which have been shared with the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration and National Transportation Safety Board, according to the journal. U.S. officials are scheduled to visit Indonesia at the end of September to discuss the report, in which Indonesian investigators list some 100 factors into the crash. 7 children died and scores were injured early Monday when a school building collapsed in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, according to a government spokesman, in an accident blamed on shoddy construction. Hundreds of angry residents of Dagoretti, a poor suburb where many live in makeshift homes, swarmed around the site where rescuers were picking through the rubble. Even Kamuri, the chief executive of the Kenyatta National Hospital, told journalists that 2 of the injured children were in critical condition, while others had soft tissue injuries or light wounds and were being examined. Dagoretti MP John Kirari told KTN Television that it appeared the first floor had collapsed on children on the ground floor. However, details were still sketchy. The school was a private institution. Kiari said the area had no public land on which to construct a proper public school. Moses Niakongara, an official with the National Building Inspectorate, said at the scene that the school was not properly constructed and it is totally substandard. Albania was rattled by its strongest earthquake in decades on Saturday, according to officials, sending people fleeing into the streets in several cities, damaging buildings and triggering power cuts in the capital. The epicenter of the shallow 5.6 magnitude quake was near Durrës, less than 40 kilometers west of the capital, Tirana, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. Albania's defense ministry said it was the strongest earthquake in the country in the last 20 to 30 years. Defense Ministry spokesman Albana Kajaj said there are no deaths. Some 80 people sought medical help in both Tirana and Durrës, 21 of whom were hospitalized due to injuries caused by falling objects or parts of walls, as well as for panic attacks, according to Health Minister Ogerta Manasterilu. Kajaj said that houses and buildings in Tirana had been damaged but were still standing, and that the ministry was assessing the damage in other towns and villages. Prime Minister Eddie Rama canceled his scheduled trip to the United States following the quake, which cut electricity and telephone lines in Tirana and a number of other towns and villages. Many people remained outside their homes for several hours in the capital, fearful of aftershocks. Media reported that a large building in Tirana was seriously damaged and that residents were being evacuated. A University of Tirana building was also damaged, according to witnesses. According to local media reports, at least 2 people were lightly injured and a dozen houses collapsed in the village of Helmes, 10 kilometers from Tirana. 2 other earthquakes followed the strong one that occurred at around 4 p.m. and was felt in neighboring Montenegro and Italy, but also on the Greek island of Corfu, according to some Twitter users. In other news, the Democratic Republic of the Congo is to introduce a second vaccine next month to combat the Ebola virus, which has killed more than 2,100 people in the country, according to the World Health Organization on Monday. Matshidiso Moeti, WHO's regional director for Africa, said the second vaccine will help ensure that we have potentially an additional tool to prevent the expansion of the outbreak and also a potential tool to protect populations before outbreaks hit at areas at risk. The ongoing Ebola outbreak is the second worst one in history after more than 11,000 people were killed in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia between 2014 and 2016. The WHO said last week that as of September 17, DRC had registered a total of 3,145 cases of Ebola since the outbreak began over a year ago, including 2,103 deaths. It has declared the Ebola epidemic a public health emergency of international concern. Around 225,000 people have received the Ebola vaccine manufactured by German pharma giant Merck since August 8, 2018. In other news, tens of thousands of Indian Americans converge on Houston for an unusual joint rally by President Donald Trump and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, a visible symbol of the bond between the nationalist-minded leaders, with many in the crowd decked out in formal Indian attire or the signature saffron of Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party. The event kicked off in a football stadium with a Sikh blessing boisterous Bhangra dancing and, in a nod to local customs, cheerleaders in cowboy hats. Dubbed with a Texan twang, Howdy Modi, organizers described the gathering as the largest ever reception for a foreign leader in the U.S., in the U.S. with more than 50,000 people registered. U.S. presidents rarely join other countries' leaders before diaspora events, and President Trump, with a hard line on immigration, one of his signature issues, is hardly known for celebrating ethnic diversity. But with U.S. elections due in 14 months, President Trump's presence may help soften his image in Houston, one of the most multi-ethnic U.S. cities and ground zero in the rival Democratic Party's recent gains in the state of Texas, a must-win bastion of his Republican Party.
A sense of leadership, a passion for America, a concern for every American, a belief in American future, and a strong resolve to make America great again. You had introduced me to your family in 2017, and today I have the honor to introduce you to my family.
I've also come to express my profound gratitude to the nearly 4 million amazing Indian Americans all across our country. You enrich our culture. You uphold our values. You uplift our communities, and you are truly proud to be American, and we are proud to have you as Americans. Prime Minister Modi, I look forward to working with you to make our nations even more prosperous than ever before. And that's what's happening. The economic miracles taking place today are just beginning. That means that in America and India alike, we honor, respect, trust, empower, and fight for the citizens we proudly serve. Under Prime Minister Modi's leadership, the world is witnessing a strong, sovereign, and thriving Republic of India.
Eagle News, we'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back. British travel group Thomas Cook on Monday declared bankruptcy after failing to reach a last-ditch rescue deal triggering the UK's biggest repatriation since World War II to bring back tens of thousands of stranded passengers. The 178-year-old operator, which had struggled against fierce online competition for some time and which had blamed Brexit uncertainty for a recent drop in bookings, was desperately seeking £200 million from private investors to avert collapse. The news leaves some 600,000 tourists stranded worldwide, according to Thomas Cook, including more than 150,000 holidaymakers seeking help from the British government to return from destinations including Bulgaria, Cuba, Turkey, and the US.
Thomas Cook in big trouble, gone under. Was meant to fly at 10:30 this morning and then fly at 7:30 tonight.
Do you have advance money to get another flight? Or?
No.
Big news.
Yeah, they've been in trouble since last week.
Launching Britain's largest repatriation in peacetime history, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps added that the government and UK Aviation Authority had hired dozens of charter planes to fly home Thomas Cook customers. As well as grounding its planes, Thomas Cook has been forced to shut travel agencies, leaving the group's 22,000 global employees, 9,000 of whom are in Britain, out of a job. The General Secretary of the Transport Salaried Staffs Association, Manuel Cortez, said that the government is morally bankrupt for not having intervened to stop the collapse of Thomas Cook. Take a look.
It's a terrible situation. Thousands of our members face losing their jobs. Our position is very clear, is that the government should have intervened to stop the collapse of Thomas Cook. I tell you, you really need to question the morality of a government that is prepared to spend more money now in repatriating people and bring them back to Britain than it would have cost to save Thomas Cook and 9,000 jobs. They are morally bankrupt. There will be a time to have an inquiry into what went wrong at Thomas Cook. What is really important today is that we save Thomas Cook. It's an iconic brand in Britain. It's been part of our high street for almost 200 years, and we need to get it back onto our high street and make sure that Thomas Cook continues to operate. And that's why I'm calling today for the government to intervene, to bring the company into public ownership and ensure that Thomas Cook continues to operate.
At least 1,000 jobs will be open for Filipino workers in Israel's tourism industry by the end of the year, according to an envoy on Monday. In a media interview, Ambassador to the Philippines, Rafael Harpaz, said the Philippines was the first country that Israel signed an agreement with to fill hotel and restaurant job openings in its country. He said, quote, "We decided to open Israel to a limited amount of overseas workers all over the world. We start with 2,000 and 1,000 of them will be Filipinos." He said this on the sidelines of the Water Technology Forum in Makati City. With the increasing tourist arrivals to Israel every year, Ambassador Harpaz noted that the Filipinos have the best service in hotels and restaurants. Israel has prioritized Filipinos to work and stay in their country due to the, quote, "good relationship established by the government leaders of the two countries."
Filipinos that will be working in Israeli hotels.
Set in 2019, 80s movie Blade Runner envisaged as a neon-stained landscape of bionic replicants genetically engineered to look just like humans. So far, that has failed to materialize, but at a secretive research institute in Western Japan, wild-haired roboticist Hiroshi Ishiguro is fine-tuning technology that could blur the line between man and machine. Take a look.
私は人と自然に対話するロボットの研究開発のためのプラットフォームとして開発されたアンドロイドです。そうですか。でも休憩も大事ですから、たまにはこういう場所でゆっくりしてくださいね。
Fundamentally, the human, we need to have a technology.
Okay, we are improving our the abilities by developing new technologies. Technology is a way of evolution. Therefore, we cannot separate human and technology, human and robot, human and AI. They're tightly coupled. Okay. Therefore, it is not a dilemma. It's our way of evolution. I cannot believe this. Why the Hollywood hate the robots so much, and Hollywood want to destroy this world with a robot so many times. It seems crazy.
Game of Thrones took the top Emmy for Best Drama, but dark British comedy Fleabag was the surprise big winner of the television's glitziest night, dominating the comedy prizes at a star-studded ceremony in Los Angeles. Take a look.
Game of Thrones.
Show in the history of the Emmys, television's Oscar finished with 12 awards overall for its final season.
We want to thank all of our lovely and amazing cast. You guys, you make everything we write better. We love you, and we have loved every minute we have spent with all of you.
I count myself.
Peter Dinklage won his 4th Best Supporting Actor statuette for his portrayal of sharp-tongued dwarf Tyrion Lannister.
Tolerance.
Peter Dinklage, Game of Thrones.
He'll be sliding down the banisters for Tyrion Lannister at Bennington College tonight as Dinklage goes.
I count myself so fortunate to be a member of a community that is nothing but all about tolerance and diversity, because no other place could I be standing on a stage.
And in the night's biggest shock, Fleabag star Phoebe Waller-Bridge bested 8-time acting winner Julia Louis-Dreyfus before the show itself won for Best Comedy Series. The BBC show, which has grown into a phenomenon on both sides of the Atlantic after being acquired by Amazon, also scooped awards for Best Comedy Writing and Directing on Sunday, and 6 overall.
And the journey has been absolutely mental to get here. And I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's been involved, everyone who's standing behind me here, this unbelievable team. 2 brothers, Harry and Jack Williams, who I told them 2 jokes over a pint, and they said, "We'll option you."
Male counterpart.
Meanwhile, Michelle Williams accepted the Best Emmy for Best Actress in a limited series or TV movie for her role as the Broadway dancer and actress Gwen Verdon in FX's Fosse Verdon. In her acceptance speech, she pointed to the discrepancy between how the Michelle Williams of Hollywood are treated both on set and in their paycheck compared to performers of color, specifically black actresses.
And so the next time a woman, and especially a woman of color, because she stands to make 52 cents on the dollar compared to her white male counterpart, tells you what she needs in order to do her job, listen to her, believe her, because one day she might stand in front of you and say thank you for allowing her to succeed because of her workplace environment and not in spite of it. Listen to her, believe her, because one day she might stand in front of you and say thank you.
All right, and with that, we end tonight's program. That's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angeles, always one with 25. Good night.